Welcome to the Explainer. It's pretty wild to think about, but every single thought you have and every literal action you take actually starts with these tiny, microscopic gaps in your nervous system. They're called synapses, and they basically dictate how we think, move, and survive. Today, we're going to break down exactly how they work. And hey, if you're gearing up for your O-level biology exams, mastering this specific system is absolutely crucial for securing those top marks. So, let's get into it.
Okay, let's quickly map out our agenda for today. First, we'll hit the spark of action. Then we're diving into the anatomy of a neuron. After that, we'll compare gray versus white matter, contrast voluntary and involuntary actions, check out how we bypass the brain entirely, and finally, wrap up with those key exam takeaways. Section 1. The spark of action. Understanding stimulus and response.
So imagine the physical world right now, the temperature of the room, the light from your screen, whatever you're currently touching. How does a change in that environment actually trigger your body to react? Well, it all starts right here with a stimulus. As you can see on the definition we've got pulled up, a stimulus is just any detectable change in the environment that triggers a reaction. If you think of your nervous system as this massive biological equation, the stimulus is your fundamental input variable. Literally, without a stimulus, there's no response. It's the absolute foundation of the entire nervous system.
Let's break these inputs down. Notice how we've mapped out an external stimulus on the top row here. You touch a hot surface, and boom, that maps directly over to a physical reaction, pulling your hand away. The input came from outside your body. Now check out the bottom row. This is an internal stimulus. Something like an increase in your blood CO2 levels flows straight into a systemic bodily reaction, like breathing faster. But the overall flow? It's always exactly the same. A detectable change leads straight to an immediate biological reaction.
Section 2. Anatomy of a neuron. The microscopic building blocks.
All right, so we know the input and the output, right? But what's actually connecting them? Let's zoom way in. In this magnified view, you're looking at a synapse. By definition, a synapse is the tiny gap between neurons that is responsible for transmitting signals. You see, our nervous system isn't just one long continuous wire. It's a massive network of individual cells, and the signals have to literally jump this gap to pass the message along. I really cannot stress this enough. Understanding this tiny little gap and how chemical messengers cross it is a total game changer for your exams.
Let's see how this actually flows across the whole cell. Watch this sequence. Step 1, right over here. The dendrites. These branch-like structures receive the incoming signals. Then that electrical charge flows right into step 2, the cell body, which processes the signal. And finally, the signal shoots down into step 3, the axon. This long, cable-like structure is your transmission line, firing the signal forward to the next neuron, or maybe directly to a muscle. So it's always receive, process, transmit. Section 3. Gray versus white matter, the processing centers of the CNS.
Now that we've got a handle on the individual neuron, let's zoom back out to the central nervous system, where millions of these neurons clump together. Look at this stark visual contrast we've laid out. Over on the left, we've got gray matter. See those dense, highly concentrated clusters? That area is packed with cell bodies and synapses. It's your slow, complex analytical center. Now compare that to the right side, the white matter. Notice those thick, rapid directional vectors? That is a biological highway system made of myelinated axons, perfectly designed for ultra-fast signal transmission. Basically, gray matter thinks and white matter links.
Section 4. Voluntary versus involuntary actions. Mapping action pathways.
Let's look at how the central nervous system actually orchestrates these large-scale bodily reactions. This boundary brilliantly illustrates the strict divide between our conscious control and our automatic survival instincts. On the left, we've mapped out voluntary actions. These require actual conscious thought. The signal has to route all the way up through your higher brain centers, like when you make the deliberate choice to wave hello to a friend. But on the right, involuntary actions, or reflexes. These are purely automatic, rapid safety protocols. It's like instantly jerking your hand away from a fire. You don't even think about it. Your body just acts to save you.
Section 5. Bypassing the brain. Inside the reflex arc.
And that automatic safety protocol brings us perfectly to the reflex arc. This is basically the body's ultimate evolutionary cheat code for dealing with sudden, severe physical danger. But I want you to think about this. What if reflex actions just couldn't occur? Like what if every single time you touched a burning hot stove, that pain signal had to travel all the way up your arm into your conscious brain, wait for you to process the pain, decide what to do, and then send a command all the way back down? Well, the answer is pretty terrifying. Without reflex actions, our bodies would be dangerously slow to react. That tiny delay in processing time would massively increase your risk of severe injury. You would literally burn your hand badly before the thought to move it even crossed your mind. So to put that into perspective, this really highlights the absolute necessity of having an ultra-fast emergency pathway that doesn't sit around waiting for your conscious permission.
Okay, so how exactly does this emergency pathway work? Let's track this chronological flow step by step. Step 1, a harmful stimulus happens, and the signal shoots into the spinal cord. Step 2, the signal catches a rapid neural pathway directly through the spinal cord, and, this is key, it entirely skips the trip up to the brain. Step 3, the motor fibers immediately exit through the ventral root of the spinal cord. And finally, step 4, the command hits the muscle, triggering an instant protective contraction.
Now, pay close attention to this red warning label right here, because this is an absolute exam trap that costs so many students marks. In reflex actions, the brain is not involved in the initial response. I repeat, not involved. The entire point of the reflex arc is to completely bypass the brain so we can maximize speed. Your brain actually finds out about the pain a fraction of a second later, after your hand is already pulled back to safety. Definitely lock that boundary into your memory.
Section 6 Key Exam Takeaways. Securing your biology marks.
All right, we've mapped out the inputs, the microscopic wiring, and those high-speed emergency pathways. Let's pull this all together so you can absolutely crush your exam. Here's what you need to remember about how these variables interlock. 1. A stimulus is always the input that triggers a response. 2. Neurons transmit those signals across those tiny gaps we call synapses. 3. Gray matter processes the data while the myelinated white matter transmits it at high speed. 4. Voluntary actions require conscious thought, but reflexes, purely automatic. And 5. Reflex arcs are your rapid safety responses that totally bypass the brain to keep you out of harm's way.
Before we wrap up this explainer, I've got one final tip for you. Practice your diagram labeling. Make sure you can physically point to and label the parts of a synapse and a reflex arc on a blank diagram. If you can clearly differentiate between voluntary and involuntary actions on your exam, just like we mapped out today, you are going to easily secure those marks. So the only question I've left for you is, are you ready to map out your next biological system? Keep studying, keep visualizing those pathways, and I'll see you in the next explainer.